To speak of a ghost is to speak of a presence defined by absence. It is an outline, a memory, a chilling draft in the warm, still air of a sealed room. In the Grand Chronicle of ancient Egypt, a civilization obsessed with permanence, with the eternal preservation of name and deed. One of the most powerful pharaohs to have ever lived was deliberately, meticulously, and ruthlessly rendered a ghost. His name was chiseled from stone. His statues were smashed. His city was abandoned to the sands, and his very existence was purged from the official record for over 3,000 years. He vanished. This was an act of historical assassination, a state-sanctioned murder of memory. The Romans had a term for it, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. And its most profound ancient victim was the pharaoh Akhenaten. When later kings, such as Seti I at Abydos, commissioned the great lists of their divine predecessors, a chronological roll call of the rulers of the two lands. They made a conspicuous leap. The record jumps from the magnificent Amenhotep III directly to the general King Orimed, a gap of nearly 2 decades. A void in the timeline of the mighty 18th dynasty is papered over with silence. It is as if the intervening years and the pharaohs who reigned within them simply did not happen. There was no Nefertiti. There was no Tutankhamun. They were the unpersons, the great heresy that had to be forgotten for the cosmic order, for Maat to be restored. The rediscovery began not in the hallowed halls of Karnak or the shadowed valley of the kings, but in the desolate, crescent-shaped plain of Amarna, midway between Thebes and Memphis. Here, in the late 18th and 19th centuries, travelers and early archaeologists stumbled upon the ruins of a vast, unrecorded city. They found boundaries steely carved into the cliffs, claiming the land for a strange new god. They unearthed palaces, temples, and villas, decorated in a bizarre, almost alien artistic style. The human figures were distorted, with elongated skulls, pendulous bellies, and spindly limbs, a stark departure from the serene, idealized forms that had defined Egyptian art for millennia. The inscriptions spoke of a king named Akhenaten and his radiant queen Nefertiti. They worshipped a single deity, the Aten, represented not as a human or animal, but as a solar disk whose rays terminated in tiny hands, offering the Ankh, the symbol of life, to the royal family alone. Who was this What was this strange city of Amarna? His royal seat, named Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. And what was the nature of his revolution? A heresy so profound, so terrifying to the Egyptian establishment, that it warranted the most extreme sanction imaginable. Complete and utter erasure from history. To understand the ghost, we must first reconstruct the man. We must return to the world he sought to destroy, the opulent, polytheistic, and supremely confident Egypt of the late 18th dynasty. Before the heresy, there was the zenith. Akhenaten as Pharaoh. Amenhotep III presided over an Egypt of unparalleled wealth and international prestige. Known as Amenhotep the Magnificent, his reign was the high water mark of imperial power. Gold from the Nubian mines flowed into the treasuries in such quantities that it was said to be as common as dust. The courts of the Near East, of the Mitanni and the Babylonians, pleaded for it in their diplomatic correspondence. This was a world dominated by a complex and deeply entrenched pantheon of gods, a system that had guided Egypt for 1,000 years. Chief among them was Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, whose cult center at Thebes was the religious and economic heart of the empire. The priesthood of Amun-Ra was not merely a spiritual body, it was a corporation of immense power. Its land holdings were vast, second only to the crown itself. Its treasuries overflowed with the spoils of empire. Its high priest was a figure of national importance, a political player who could influence policy and even succession. The great temple complex at Karnak was a city unto itself, a sprawling testament to the symbiotic relationship between the pharaoh and the gods. Specifically, the Theban triad of Emin, his consort Mut, and their son, Khonsu. For generations, the pharaoh was the son of Amun, the earthly guarantor of Maat, the divine order that kept chaos at bay. The system worked. It had built the most enduring civilization the world had ever known. Into this world of gilded certainty was born a prince named Amenhotep. Meaning, Amen is satisfied. He was not his father's firstborn son and heir. That was a prince named Thutmose, who served as a priest of Ptah, and then vanished from the record, presumably dying young. Thus, the younger Amenhotep, the future Akhenaten, was elevated to the position of crown prince. The historical record is frustratingly sparse on his youth. Was he a sickly, isolated boy, sequestered in the palace at Moqata, dreaming up his radical theology in solitude? Or was he an active participant in the court of his father, a man who himself had shown a minor but notable fascination with solar theology? Amenhotep III had referred to himself as the dazzling sun disk, or Aten, and had named his royal barge in a palace after this aspect of the sun god. Was the sun simply taking the father's Nasanta ideas to their absolute, explosive conclusion? The debate over a potential co-regency between Amenhotep III and his son is one of modern Egyptology's most contentious scholarly battlegrounds. Proponents point to certain artistic and inscriptional evidence suggesting a period where father and son ruled together, a time that could have allowed for the gradual development of the younger king's religious ideas. Opponents argue just as forcefully that the evidence is misread, that the transition was a traditional succession upon the father's death. The truth of this period remains elusive, but what is certain is that when Prince Amenhotep took the throne as Amenhotep IV, the initial years of his reign appeared, on the surface, to be largely conventional. He was crowned at Thebes. He respected the traditional rites, and early depictions show him in the classic, athletic, pharaonic style. But the seeds of revolution were already being sown, and they were sown in the very heart of the establishment he would come to despise, Karnak itself. In the shadow of the great hypostyle halls dedicated to Amenhotep IV commissioned a series of massive temples dedicated to the eight. One, the Gempatan, or the Aten is found, was a colossal undertaking. Its architecture was radical. Instead of dark, mysterious sanctuaries, it featured open-air courts, allowing the sun's rays, the physical manifestation of the Aten, to flood the space. The decorations were equally shocking. The king was depicted in the new, strange Amarna style, his physique distorted, his features exaggerated. Here, he was worshipped not just as the god's intermediary, but as his sole prophet and physical offspring. This was a direct, audacious challenge to the Theban triad. It was a theological and economic declaration of war on the priesthood of Amen. He was siphoning off state revenues to build a new cult on their very doorstep that explicitly sought to supplant them. He was redefining the nature of the sun god itself. The Aten, traditionally just one aspect of the great god Ra, was being elevated. First, it was promoted above the other gods, a doctrine known as but soon, even that would not be enough. Amenhotep IV was on a trajectory towards something far more absolute, something Egypt had never seen before, a form of radical monotheism. The thousands of gods who had populated the Egyptian cosmos for millennia were not merely being demoted, they were being declared non-existent. There was only one god, the Aten, and there was only one prophet, the Pharaoh. The crisis was no longer brewing, it had arrived. The Rubicon was crossed in the 5th year of his reign. The Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, Amen is satisfied, performed an act of profound personal and political significance. He changed his name. He cast off the patronage of the god of Thebes and declared his sole allegiance to his new deity. He became Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, or sometimes spirit of the Aten. This was more than a cosmetic change. It was a severance, a formal declaration of his heresy. At the same time, his principal wife, the beautiful Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, also adjusted her name, adding the epithet Neferneferutan. Beautiful are the beauties of the Aten. The royal couple had rebranded themselves as the twin pillars of a new faith. But a new faith requires a new world, a new stage untainted by the corrupting influence of the past. Thebes, with its grand temples to the Theban triad, was the city of Amun. It was ideologically compromised ground. Akhenaten needed a clean slate, a place where his revolutionary vision could be made manifest in stone and sand. He chose a virgin site, a vast bay in the desert cliffs on the east bank of the Nile, about 250 miles north of Thebes. He declared that this site was chosen by the Aton itself. He marked its boundaries with 14 enormous rock-cut stelae, inscribed with the foundational oath of his new capital. In his own words, he proclaimed he would never pass beyond these boundaries, that this place, Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, would be the eternal home of his god, his family, and his government. The construction of Akhenaten was a marvel of logistics and frenzied activity. A new capital for the entire Egyptian empire was raised from the desert floor in a matter of years. Palaces, temples, administrative buildings, barracks, and extensive residential areas for a population of perhaps 30,000 people were laid out. The city's design reflected the new theology. The Great Temple, its centerpiece, had no roof. Its courts opened to the sky, allowing the sun's rays to pour in unimpeded. The royal road cut through the city's heart, a processional way for the royal family to travel by chariot from their palace to the temples, a daily public display of their unique communion with the divine. The city of Amarna, as we now call it, was the physical embodiment of Akhenaten's revolution. The core text of this revolution is the great hymn to the Aton, found inscribed in the tomb of the courtier Ayatamon. It is one of the most remarkable documents to survive from the ancient world, a piece of religious poetry of breathtaking beauty and radical theology. It addresses the Aton, not as a uniquely Egyptian god, but as a universal creator of all humanity. You create the earth according to your desire, while you are alone. All peoples, herds, and flocks, it proclaims, their tongues are separate in speech, and their characters as well. Their skins are different, for you have distinguished the peoples. This is a stunning departure from traditional Egyptian religion, which was nationalistic and often xenophobic. The Aten was the god of the Nubian and the Syrian as much as the Egyptian. However, the hymn also reveals the central, non-negotiable tenet of Akhenaten's faith. This universal god, this loving creator, was unknowable to humanity. There is no other who knows you, the hymn states, save your son, Akhenaten. This was the crux of the heresy. Akhenaten was not just the chief priest. He was the sole conduit through which the divine could be accessed. The people of Egypt were not to worship the Aten directly. They were to worship Akhenaten and his family, who in turn would intercede with the Aten on their behalf. This transformed the pharaoh's role from the traditional guarantor of a cosmic system to the focal point of a soteriological framework. He and Nefertiti were the exclusive gatekeepers to salvation and eternal life. This was not a populist monotheism in the Judeo-Christian sense. It was a highly exclusionary system, centered entirely on the divine status of the royal family. This new theology demanded a new visual language. The artistic revolution of the Amarna period remains one of its most potent and debated legacies. The serene, muscular, idealized bodies of the traditional pharaonic canon were abandoned. In their place emerged a style that has been variously described as expressionistic, naturalistic, or simply strange. Akhenaten is depicted with a long, thin face, a drooping jaw, full lips, a slender neck, and a strangely feminine body, with a swollen belly, wide hips, and heavy thighs, paired with spindly arms and legs. Other members of the royal family, including the famously beautiful Nefertiti and their daughters, are shown with similarly elongated skulls. What explains this radical iconoclasm against the established artistic tradition? For decades, scholars proposed various medical explanations. Was Akhenaten suffering from a genetic disorder like Marfan syndrome or Froelich syndrome, which could account for the unusual physique? And was the art simply a brutally honest depiction of his true appearance? While intriguing, these hypotheses lack conclusive evidence and fail to explain why everyone in the royal circle was depicted in a similar manner. A more compelling interpretation lies in the realm of theology. The Aten was a creator god, containing both male and female principles. Akhenaten, as the god's sole representative on Earth, may have been deliberately depicted with androgynous features to embody this creative duality. The swollen belly and wide hips could symbolize fertility, the source of all life, which flowed from the Aten through him. The art was not a literal portrait, but a theological manifesto, a visual representation of the new cosmic order. Within this new order, Queen Nefertiti played a role of unprecedented prominence. Egyptian queens had always been important, but Nefertiti was something more. In the art of Amarna, she is shown at a scale equal to her husband, a significant indicator of status. She is depicted leading worship, driving her own chariot, and even smiting Egypt's enemies, a traditionally male, pharaonic pose. Some of the most intimate and charming scenes in Egyptian art come from this period, showing Akhenaten playing with their 6 daughters, bouncing them on their knees, a humanizing touch absent from the formal art of other eras. But she was more than a wife and mother. She was a Karajan, a full partner in the religious and political revolution. Her power was immense, and her story, as we shall see, becomes even more enigmatic in the later years of the reign. The famous painted bust of her, discovered in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, has made her an icon of beauty, but her true significance lies in her power. A queen who stood shoulder to shoulder with the most radical pharaoh in Egyptian history, while Akhenaten focused his formidable energies inward, on the construction of his city and the propagation of his faith. The world outside Egypt did not stand still. The geopolitical landscape of the Late Bronze Age was a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and obligations, a system maintained through constant diplomatic contact and the strategic application of military power. The primary evidence for this international situation comes from one of the most important archaeological discoveries ever made in Egypt: the Amarna letters, found by a local woman in 1887. This archive consists of over 300 cuneiform tablets, the diplomatic lingua franca of the day, representing the correspondence between the Egyptian court and the other great powers and vassal states of the Near East. These letters paint a troubling picture of Akhenaten's foreign policy, while the great kings of Babylonia and Mitanni write as equals, complaining about the quality of gold shipments or negotiating royal marriages. The more desperate pleas come from the rulers of Egypt's vassal cities in Canaan and Syria. Men like Ribadada of Byblos and of the Heba of Jerusalem write letter after frantic letter, begging the pharaoh for military support. They are under attack from opportunistic neighbors and the encroaching forces of the expanding Hittite Empire, Egypt's great rival to the north. Their letters speak of betrayal, of cities falling, of Egyptian authority crumbling. "Let the king, my lord, send troops," they plead, "for if no troops come in this year, all the lands of the king, my lord, will be lost." The response from Akhenaten's court at Amarna appears to have been one of supreme indifference. Engrossed in his theological project, the pharaoh seems to have neglected the empire his ancestors had fought so hard to build. Whether this was a deliberate policy of isolationism or simply neglect is debatable. Perhaps he believed the universal power of the Aten superseded the petty squabbles of vassal kings. Whatever the reason, the consequence was the erosion of Egyptian influence in the Levant and the empowerment of the Hittites, setting the stage for the great military conflicts of the next dynasty under Seti I and Ramesses the Great. The heresy at home was having devastating consequences abroad. Domestically, the revolution entered its most aggressive and destructive phase. Simple neglect of the old gods was no longer sufficient. Akhenaten launched a full-scale campaign of iconoclasm, a physical assault on the very memory of the traditional pantheon. State-sponsored gangs of workmen were dispatched throughout the land, from the Delta to the Nubian frontier, with a single chilling mission: to eradicate the names of the old gods, especially the hated Amun-Ra. The plural word for gods was also targeted. From the grandest temples to the smallest personal stelae, the names were systematically hammered out and chiseled away. This was an act of profound violence in the Egyptian worldview. To destroy a name was to destroy the existence of the entity itself, to kill it in the afterlife. Akhenaten was not merely closing temples. He was attempting to retroactively assassinate the gods of his own culture. This nationwide program of damnatio memoria against the gods would have caused immense social and economic upheaval. The temples were not just places of worship. They were the engines of the local economy. They were major landowners, employers, centers of commerce, and craft production. To shut them down was to create mass unemployment and resentment, For the common people, whose daily lives were intertwined with the worship of a host of local and household deities, this official atheism towards their gods must have been bewildering and terrifying. Their entire conception of the cosmos, of the afterlife, of divine justice, was being dismantled by royal decree. The heresy, once confined to the court, now directly impacted every subject of the pharaoh, and the seeds of a counter-revolution were surely being sown in the hearts of a disenfranchised priesthood and a confused populace. The final years at Amarna are shrouded in mystery and shadow. The vibrant, optimistic scenes of the early reign give way to a darker mood. A plague, possibly originating in the Near East, seems to have swept through Egypt, reaching even the carefully isolated capital of Akhenaten. Several of Akhenaten's 6 daughters disappear from the record, their names no longer appearing in reliefs. The most significant disappearance is that of Nefertiti herself. Around year 12 or 14 of Akhenaten's reign, she vanishes from the historical and artistic record. What happened to this most powerful of queens? Was she a victim of the plague? Did she fall from favor? Or did she undergo a transformation, taking on a new name and a new role? Some theories suggest she was elevated to the status of a full co-regent, ruling under the name Neferneferutan, and may have even outlived Akhenaten for a short time. Others argue that Neferneferutan was a separate individual, perhaps one of Akhenaten's daughters. The evidence is ambiguous, the trail gone cold in the desert sands. As his reign neared its end, Akhenaten appears to have become even more extreme, pushing his theology to its limits. He seems to have equated himself more and more directly with the Aten itself, moving from being the god's son and prophet to being a divine being in his own right. The Amarna project, his great utopia, was becoming an isolated cult of personality, cut off from the concerns of the empire and the traditions of its people. The death of Akhenaten himself, around his 17th year on the throne, is as obscure as his final years. His original tomb at Amarna was never used for his final burial. He was likely interred somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, but his body has never been definitively identified. The controversial KV-55 tomb, containing a jumble of Amarna period funerary equipment and a single, desecrated male mummy, has been proposed as his, but its identity remains a subject of intense scientific and Egyptological debate. The heretic king died, and with him, the entire theological edifice he had constructed began to crumble almost immediately. The end of the Amarna heresy was as swift as its beginning was radical. Following Akhenaten's death, the throne was occupied by 1 or 2 ephemeral rulers. The first was Smenkir, a figure so mysterious he may have been Akhenaten's brother, son, or even Nefertiti, ruling as a male pharaoh. The next was Neferneferutan, who may or may not have been the same person. The situation was clearly unstable, a brief and confusing interregnum before the forces of tradition began to reassert themselves. The final actor in the Amarna drama then stepped onto the stage. A young boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, named Tutankhaten, the living image of the Aten. This boy, who was almost certainly the son of Akhenaten, was married to Akhenaten, Akhenaten's third daughter. He was the last of the royal line, but the powers behind his throne, likely the old courtieri and the general Horum, had recognized that Atenist experiment had been a catastrophic failure. The empire was weakened, the economy was in disarray, and the populace was alienated. A strategic retreat was necessary for the survival of the 18th dynasty. Within a few years of taking the throne, the young king signaled the end of the revolution. He changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamen, the living image of Amen. His wife became Ankisa. The court abandoned the city of Akhenaten, leaving Akhenaten's great creation to wither and die in the desert. The capital was moved back to Memphis, and the religious center of power was restored to Thebes. The Theban triad was back. Tutankhamun's restoration stela details this process, framing it as a righteous act of renewal. It speaks of the temples of the old gods having fallen into ruin, terrace overgrown with weeds. It describes the young king driving out chaos, restoring the divine offerings, and rebuilding the priesthood. It is a document of pure propaganda, a complete repudiation of his father's legacy. The heresy was over. But for the new establishment, repudiation was not enough. The stain of Akhenaten's revolution had to be scrubbed from the historical record entirely. After the brief reigns of Tutankhamun and his successor Ai, the throne was seized by the general Pharaoh, who initiated the true campaign of persecution. Akhenaten was now referred to in official texts only as that criminal or the enemy of Horemheb, and his successors in the Ramesside dynasty like Seti I and Ramesses II launched the official, systematic Akhenaten was dismantled, its finely carved Talatot blocks used as filler for new constructions at Karnak and Hermopolis. This act of destruction ironically preserved them, as they were hidden within the walls of later pylons. A vast jigsaw puzzle for modern archaeologists to research. Across Egypt, the last vestiges of Akhenaten's name and image were sought out and destroyed. The iconoclasm he had visited upon the gods was now turned upon him with a vengeance. His name, along with those of his immediate successors, Nefertiti and Tutankhamun, was omitted from all official king lists, creating the historical void that puzzled early Egyptologists. He was to be forgotten, and for 3 millennia, he was. The great irony of this project of erasure is how it ultimately failed. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter in 1922 was a global sensation. While Tutankhamun himself had overseen the beginning of the restoration, his tomb was filled with objects that were masterpieces of the Amarna artistic style. His golden throne depicts him and his wife, Akhenaten, under the rays of the Aton, a clear remnant of his Adnist youth. The treasures from his tomb gave the world its first real glimpse into the unique aesthetic of the Amarna period. Simultaneously, the painstaking excavations at the site of Amarna itself, by archaeologists like Flinders Petrie and later Barry Kemp, brought the lost city of Akhenaten back to life. The puzzle of the heretic king was being reassembled piece by piece from the very evidence his enemies had tried to bury. So, who was Akhenaten? Was he the world's first monotheist, a brilliant philosopher king, a visionary mystic far ahead of his time whose ideas may have influenced later faiths? Sigmund Freud, in his book Moses and Monotheism, famously and controversially argued for a direct link between Atonism and the origins of Judaism. Or was he a despotic tyrant, a religious fanatic whose obsession with his singular theology blinded him to the needs of his people and the security of his empire? Was he a courageous revolutionary who dared to challenge a corrupt and ossified religious establishment? Or was he a heretic whose egoism led him to declare himself the sole arbiter of divine truth? The truth, as is so often the case in history, is likely a complex amalgam of all these things. He was undeniably a figure of immense conviction and creativity, the author of a profound theological and artistic revolution. The great hymn to the Aten stands as a testament to a mind capable of envisioning a universal, benevolent creator god. Yet he was also an autocrat, an enforcer of a deeply intolerant iconoclasm, who brutally suppressed the traditional beliefs of his own people. His reign, while artistically brilliant, was a political and military disaster for the 18th dynasty, weakening the empire at a critical moment. Akhenaten's legacy is not found in the religion he created. Atonism was a top-down revolution, so inextricably linked to the person of the king that it could not survive his death. It withered on the vine the moment its sole prophet was gone. His true legacy lies in the ghost he became. It lies in the furious, systematic reaction he provoked. The sheer scale of the damnatio memoria enacted against him is a measure of the terror his heresy inspired in the Egyptian establishment. They did not just disagree with him, they sought to make it so he had never been. But in doing so, they created a mystery, and in the solving of that mystery, Akhenaten achieved a strange and potent immortality. He is the secret pharaoh, the king who was erased, and who, by virtue of that erasure, haunts the history of Egypt and our own imagination more powerfully than any other. He forces us to confront the volatile, enduring power of ideas and the desperate, often futile, attempts by successors to control the past. The ghost of Amarna cannot be exorcised.